Now, if you're going to be working in any type of Microsoft administration services these days, there are some fundamental principles that are very important that you understand. So what I want to do is I want to get into some of the foundations of understanding things like Microsoft domains, understanding some of the networking technologies, RAS and VPNs and virtualization, and also we're going to talk about the cloud services and how all that fits into this. But it's important to kind of start from the beginning so you can understand where things have been, understand where things are going, and you have to consider the fact that the world is transitioning now more into a cloud-oriented environment. But in the past, everything was managed on-prem or on-premise, and we got to talk about this transition and how things were and how things are now and where Microsoft is going. So to start with, we go back in time to the 1950s, 1960s. They had mainframes, these gigantic computers that would take up like entire rooms. They used vacuum tubes. And then as we moved into the 1970s, something miraculous happened. They created what was known as an IC, an integrated circuit, which allowed basically binary math to be processed through little chips. And this is where personal computing became popular. So in the 1980s, personal computers started coming out. I'm going to draw this little symbol here to represent a computer. And I tell you what, I'm going to create another little symbol here to kind of represent a bunch of computers. So in the 1980s, companies started buying PCs and personal computers, and they started showing up in people's offices, and eventually, they were networking them together and all of that. And so this is where things really get started. Now, of course, in those days, one of the problems was we lived in what was called a peer-to-peer network. So what would happen is these computers you could network these computers together with various technologies, but there was no centralization, meaning each computer was equal. There was no computer that controls all the other computers. A network admin would have to, if they wanted to make changes, they'd have to sit down at each and every computer to make those changes or get users to help them, which was always a nightmare. And so that didn't, it worked, but it didn't work very efficiently, all right? Now, as we moved into the 1990s, there was a company that was gaining ground called Novell, and they had a product called NetWare, which was the idea of that was to use a server that would help manage machines and also allow people to share files easier. Whereas in a peer-to-peer network back originally, these machines would have to share files with each other and people would have to know each other's passwords. It just didn't work very well. Well, eventually with the creation of the file server concept, you had a more powerful machine that you could share files on and all that. And eventually Novell even came out with the idea of a server that could manage other machines. Now this is kind of where Microsoft comes in. Microsoft created their product called NT, and they created this concept of a domain controller, which is a special type of server that can manage these other servers. Now, fast forward, they came out with what was known as a domain, but fast forward to the year 2000, Microsoft releases their newest domain technology, and they call it Active Directory. And Active Directory domains were represented by a triangle. All right, and a domain controller was a server essentially that had a database on it, and that database was the Active Directory database. So let's just kind of fix that here. This little cylinder looking thing I'm going to make here is going to represent my Active Directory database. So AD. All right, and this is what we still call to this day. We call it ADDS, Active Directory Domain Services. And usually if you hear that term, Active Directory Domain Services, it means it's an on-premise domain. Although there is a version of this that can be hosted in the cloud known as Azure Active Directory Domain Services. I'm not getting into that right now. So anyway, you would always want to have more than one domain controller. The reason you want to have more than one domain controller is because the same reason you have more than one of any type of server, really. One reason being to break up the disbursement of load, these machines will authenticate with these domain controllers, and the more machines you got, you know, you don't want all of that just going to one domain controller, right? The other consideration is redundancy. If you only have one and that server goes down, well, you're in trouble, right? So we want to have multiple. The other thing about domain controllers that are interesting is that they replicate. So, for example, I'm going to make a little smiley face guy here, and this little smiley face guy is going to represent my user. So we create a user account on a domain controller. Now, the interesting thing about user accounts, or the interesting thing really about domain controllers, is that they replicate. So everything you do on one will replicate over to the other. So if I create a user account on that first one, well, replication is going to occur between both of them. And so this little arrow thing I'm going to make here is going to represent replication. So domain controllers replicate. That means that this user could log on to any one of these thousands machines, and it's going to, you know, authenticate with the domain controller. All right. The authentication protocol that is used is the protocol known as Kerberos. All right. Kerberos is the authentication protocol. What is a protocol? It's like a language, basically. Okay. Now there was an older protocol that it also supported called NTLM. That was for legacy, for older prior to the year 2000 machines. Now that protocol allowed us to have encrypted passwords and all that, and authenticate securely and all that fun stuff. The other thing is Active Directory uses a language known as the Directory Service Language, and that language was called LDAP, Lightweight Directory Access Protocol. Now all that is, again, this is all decades old at this point. At the time when it came out, it was cutting edge, but it is a bit dated nowadays. But it still works, and it's still pretty secure, though there are some considerations on security that I'm not going to explain right now. Now, the other thing that's important about Active Directory is that all machines have to have a name. And the name must be, of course, associated with an IP address and all of that. And so there is a service that we use it on the internet all the time, called DNS, Domain Name Service. Our domain must have a name. Usually when you name your domain, you would name it after your company, and a lot of people even name their domains based on their web presence. So for example, my domain might be called examlabpractice.com. That's my company, my web presence. And I'm going to need to have a server in my domain that can associate the names and IP addresses together. So that server is called a DNS server. DNS, Domain Name System Server. And that server will also have to have a little database on it, and that database will be our DNS database. Okay. So we'll just draw another little cylinder, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight this, border it with red, and then I'm going to color code the database red, which means that this database, the DNS database, is associated with that name. Now what happens is our machines, clients, domain controllers, we also might even have, let's draw a file server over here. Pretty common that we have file servers in our environment. Okay. All of these machines would register with our DNS. All right. And this allows for the centralization of name resolution, meaning they register their IP addresses into this database, and then now anytime a machine needs to find another machine, it can query DNS. So for example, these machines all have to authenticate by your domain controllers. They can query DNS and say, hey, DNS, do you know what the address is of one of my domain controllers so I can authenticate? And DNS can reply back and say, yeah, here is the information. At that point, the client can go and authenticate. So it works very efficiently. Now, all of this together, this idea of domain controllers, this triangle you see here, this provides centralization. So we moved away from peer-to-peer networking back in the day where, you know, every machine was kind of its own boss and there was no centralized way of managing things, to now we are working in a centralized environment. These domain controllers help us centralize. This DNS service helps us centralize. So we now have some central control over things. One of the great things about our domain controllers too is we have these wonderful things called GPOs, group policy objects. A group policy object is this object that you can create that has all these settings, parameters, any type of attribute you want to configure or change on machines, you can do it through a GPO. So for example, if your boss walks up to you and says, hey, I want you to force the firewalls to be turned on all these machines. I want to make sure that the antivirus is always up to date. I want you to disable some of the wallpaper feature. I don't want people putting crazy wallpapers on their machine. So I mean, the sky's the limit. There are literally thousands of things you can do inside of a GPO. But what happens is that GPO can instruct these machines to turn things on and turn things off. GPOs also replicate. So when you create a GPO on a domain controller, it replicates over to the other domain controller. So it doesn't matter which machines, authenticate with which domain controller. All right. So these GPOs can be deployed out to these machines, and this is how you turn things on, turn things off. You could even deploy software with that if you wanted to. So it was very, very powerful, a very, very powerful system for managing everything. All right. Of course, let's throw the internet into the mix here. Let's say that this little cloud is going to represent the internet, and let's talk about a little bit about how that sort of fits into the picture. Let me just clean it up here with the mighty stroke of my paintbrush. I will clean up the internet. All right. All right, so then we have the internet, right? So maybe we've got an internet connection that's coming in here, all right? And of course, you don't want to just leave your internal network exposed, so your company would generally have a firewall, right? And we'll just put that firewall right here. And so now we have a secure way for traffic to flow out to the internet, and the only things that can come in would be things that we send out, and we could allow things through that firewall if we want to. Now, this is a traditional domain. This is the way we've done things for 20 years, all right? And in this next little section, I want to talk about expansion on all of this and where things have gone with things like RAS and all that, and VPN and virtualization. So that'll wrap this little section up, and we'll move on to the next. I now want to talk about some concepts that are also sort of the foundation of how we've done things over the years. It's important to understand how we've done things over the years so we can understand how things are now. So looking back, we have an Active Directory domain, ADDS as it's called, Active Directory Domain Services, which uses the LDAP, Lightweight Directory Access Protocol, which uses Kerberos for authentication, or for the legacy back in the 90s devices that used NTLM, New Technology LAN Manager, which isn't all very new these days, but even Kerberos is pretty old considering, we've been using it for decades, and I think actually the protocol even came out back in the 1980s. So, we got some data technologies, but the technologies have been updated, a lot of them over the years, to be secure, so you can still feel comfortable using those. But let's talk about some different scenarios now. The first thing I want to look at is the scenario of what happens when we have a user who is not at the office. So this person is working from home. Working from home is a lot more popular nowadays than it has been in the past, so it's very common. And this person needs the ability perhaps to be able to connect in and access services that are inside. Okay, we've got a file server, but ultimately you probably are aware that in the past it was always this mindset of do it yourself, host your own server. So your companies might have a file server, but then they might also have a they might have a SQL database server that users need to access. Let's create that SQL. All right. Maybe Microsoft Exchange. That was email, right? Microsoft Exchange was used for email, and then maybe even like SharePoint was very popular. by Microsoft on premise. So here you've got these, these 4 servers providing a service to our devices, and you've got users working from home and everything else needing to get access to those. Let me just kind of move those a little bit over here, make a little bit of room here, and I'm going to shrink those down just a little bit as well. All right. So this user who is working from home needs to access these services, but the person is not, not around. Well, let me tell you what you shouldn't do. You shouldn't just open up all the ports on the firewall and allow this person in to get access to these devices unsecurely. In fact, in the 90s, a lot of companies did that. The very first company I ever worked for, back in the 90s, they didn't really have a firewall, so you literally could share out you had a public address, and you could connect to it from home. It was really scary when I think about it. Even in the 90s, that was scary, but nowadays it's incredibly scary. Why is it scary? Because you got these people out there that want to do things that they shouldn't do, and get access to companies' data and try to do damage and ransom and all of that, ransomware and all that. And who are these people? Well, we generally call them hackers, right? So let me draw a little hacker. This little box here is going to represent my hacker. All right, and let's make this hacker look like he's up to no good. All right, I'm gonna give him let's give him like a devil horns, some devil horns here, and maybe he's in a bad mood. I'll give him a frowny face, and give him some fangs, and maybe the fangs are dripping blood okay, no, I'm just kidding. Sorry, sometimes I get carried away. All right, but anyway, that's going to be my hacker. All right, goofy looking little hacker person. All right, and so we don't want this hacker spying on my user. We don't want this hacker getting access to resources inside. So how do we get around that? Well, usually the way we would do that is you would use a VPN, a virtual private network. So the way you would do that is you could purchase what was called a VPN concentrator, and basically it's a device that allows secure connections in. But in the Microsoft world, we actually had a type of server we could set up called a RAS server, or also known as an RAS server because it stood for Routing and Remote Access Services. But anyway, remote access services is the idea here, and with that we have support for VPN. Now what does that do? This allows this thing called a VPN tunnel to be created, which means that you have this encrypted communications that goes through to that RAS server, and then from there that RAS server allows you to access other resources securely. This hacker will not be able to see the traffic that's flowing through because it's all encrypted. The only thing the hacker would be able to see is that it was going up to this firewall, and that would be it. Wouldn't be able to see what the traffic said. So this is how we would definitely help secure things. Now, the other thing that I want to talk to you about here is what happens when a company needs to have a service that is exposed to the internet. For example, let's say that your company is going to host their own web server, okay? So you set up a web server. All right, maybe this is going to be www.examlabpractice.com or whatever, and people from the internet need to be able to get to it anonymously. Well, how are you going to do that? Where are you going to put that web server? Are you going to put it internally inside the domain like you see here? And the reason that's scary is because you would have to open up port 443, port 80, which is the HTTP ports, to allow traffic to get in, which means not only could somebody out there on the internet anonymously get into this web server, but technically so could a hacker. And if a hacker was ever to gain access over this website by hacking it, then something called pivoting could occur, where a hacker could actually gain access to these other services that are on your network. And so that's where things are really scary. So you definitely won't want to host it internally most of the time, although there was a way to do something called a reverse proxy. I won't get into that right now. But we would probably want to put this outside, right? So we'd want to put it out here. But there's something else that's a problem on that. If you put it outside that firewall, you don't have to worry about people getting allowing traffic to come in. But the scary thing about that is the fact that this poor web server is now completely exposed to the internet, so with no protection. So the way around that usually is people would get another firewall. So you'd have two firewalls. This first firewall would be called the internal connected firewall, and then this firewall here would be called the external connected firewall. Now this little network between that, we would call that a DMZ, demilitarized zone, or now the more popular term is perimeter network. Okay, so DMZ, perimeter network are basically the same thing. All right. And so now what you would do is you would only open the ports like port 80, 443, 53 for DNS if you put DNS in there, whatever ports there that you need, and now traffic would be able to get to this web server. Okay, and so even if a hacker somehow hacks this web server, you're not going to allow traffic to pass through this firewall and get to these resources. The only traffic that you might allow would be VPN. Okay, and there's a bunch of authentication and all that has to happen to make that work. All right, so that's the idea of remote access and VPNs in a nutshell for you, as well as the concept of DMZ and the perimeter network idea. Now, the final thing I want to look at with you in this video is the idea of virtualization. So I talked about how in the past it was always the mindset was we got to host everything ourselves. We got to have our own little data center. We got to have our we got to have our own servers, file server, SQL, Exchange, SharePoint, all that, and it's all got to be hosted by us. And that's the way things have always been done. All right. Now, then what you'll find is as time went on, a company called VMware came out with a way of expanding on virtualization. Just so you know, virtualization is not a new term. Virtualization has been around for a very long time. In fact, the term hypervisor is essentially the software that lets us emulate hardware. And if you can emulate hardware, you can also store software on that emulated hardware. That's the idea of virtualization. That term hypervisor has been around since the 1970s. The idea of even mainframes dividing up processing time and doing shared computing was a form of virtualization. So this is not a new concept, but VMware, they expanded on this idea, and the thing that they did that really pushed the envelope on all this was that, hey, you don't necessarily need 4 different servers. And here's the other thing. Here's the other crazy thing. If you wanted redundancy for those 4 servers, you'd really need 8 servers, right? You could do clustering those together. So you'd have 8 servers to provide redundancy for those. But with virtualization, I can set up a hypervisor server, 1 server, and virtualize those other servers. Now, in the Microsoft world, we call that Hyper-V. That is the software that does this, Hyper-V, hypervisor. Microsoft's not the one that came up with that. VMware is not the first to ever come up with that. VMware was the biggest contributor to this concept, though, so I do have to give them credit where credit is due. All right, now the other beautiful thing, though, about this is you get a really, really powerful machine. You virtualize your machines on those. You get these things called checkpoints in Microsoft. They used to be called snapshots, and a lot of other companies still call them snapshots, where you can make changes without the worry of breaking anything because you can revert back to before the change was made. The other thing that's wonderful about using virtualization is if I want to have complete redundancy, I don't have to have 8 servers. I could literally, purchase another server and have a copy of the virtual machines on that other server. Now I've only got 2 servers as opposed to having to have a total of 8 servers. Okay, so this is a very powerful feature capability that kind of started everything. Another thing that we got, and this is kind of where you start thinking about cloud computing, is with virtualization comes the term elasticity, which basically means that each of these machines can be given a certain amount of RAM processing power, but here's what's interesting about that. If one of the servers isn't using all of the available RAM that it's been given, it can share it with other servers. So for example, this file server has been given more RAM than it needs, and then SQL needs that RAM. The file server can give up some of that RAM over to SQL, and when SQL's done using that extra memory, it can release it back to everybody It's basically a pool type scenario where it gets released into a pool of RAM and pool of CPU, and they can grow and shrink as they need. And that's the a small way of sort of on-premise way of looking at elasticity. Of course, when you get into cloud computing, you'll learn that that can expand across multiple machines across the the board in these big data centers, but not to get into that just yet here. But that's the idea. Hopefully that now helps you with understanding that concept of what virtualization is. And with that is really where cloud computing started to come into play, which I'm not explaining in this video. But hopefully now you have a much better understanding of the concept of the RAS, VPN, as well the DMZ concepts and virtualization. And now in this next section we'll start getting into the concept of cloud services. Now, with the creation of virtualization, this got companies thinking, if we can emulate hardware, we can create these virtual machines, and we can store software on there. We can have operating systems running on that emulated hardware, the operating systems being called guest operating systems. We could technically host these virtual machines for companies for a price as a service. So the idea being, hey, you pay us a fee each month and we'll host your virtual servers, and you don't have to deal with all the headaches of hosting your own data center on premise, and the power that's needed to do that, and the air conditioning that's needed to do that, all the hardware that's needed to do that, as well as the knowledge of how all the hardware works. So this is essentially what a cloud company brings to the table. So various companies like Google and IBM and Microsoft and Apple and all these companies, a lot of them already had tons of data centers, these big massive warehouses all over the world that they could support it. Some of these companies, such as Microsoft and IBM and Amazon, and Amazon being one of the biggest and first, decided to open this up to the public for a fee and allow you to host your services in their data centers. So this is where cloud computing really comes into place. This big cloud here is going to represent cloud computing, mainly the Microsoft cloud computing. And of course, it's all connected to the internet with incredibly fast, high-speed internet connections, fiber connections, and all of that. So there's some terminology or some acronyms I want to talk a little bit about real fast here as we get into this. First off, in cloud computing, there is an acronym we call IaaS. That stands for Infrastructure as a Service. Okay? Infrastructure as a service means that a provider is hosting all of the hardware infrastructure for you, and then they are going to provide you with a way for you to interact with that hardware and utilize their hardware as a service. All right, and this, of course, is where Azure comes into play, Microsoft Azure. Now, you might pronounce that word different. People have different ways of saying Azure. Some people call it Azure. Some people call it Azure. Some people call it, I've even heard it called Azure before, Azure. There's various names for it. In fact, years ago when I was first learning Azure, I decided I wanted to make sure I was pronouncing this correctly. So I was like, I'm going to go to watch the developers. So I started watching videos of the developers, the people who created Azure, and I figured I would determine. The very first video I ever watched, the guy was pronouncing the word Azure, so that's how I say it. But what I further learned is that the Microsoft developers don't agree on how to say it either. Some of them say Azure, some of them call it Azure, some of them call it Azure. So anyway, tomato, tomato, pronounce it however you want to pronounce it, okay? But Azure is Microsoft's main IaaS system. What this is Microsoft is going to host, they've got all these data centers all over the world, and they're going to host their hardware so that you can host on top of their hardware your virtual machines or whatever it is. So you can host virtual machines. Microsoft will also allow you to have access to what are called virtual appliances, like virtual firewalls, also virtual load balancing software, because you can get access to what are called VNets, This is virtual networking, so you can create these virtual networks based on TCP/IP that are running your, in their cloud service with virtual machines on it, and then you can put a virtual firewall. So you can almost like recreate what you're seeing here in an on-premise environment. You can recreate that in the cloud. They also provide virtual storage, so you can store data and backup data out there. They support database hosting, all of that. That's all part of IaaS. Now with IaaS, the model for that, for the most part, is you pay for what you use. So there's an algorithm that looks at how much memory, how much processing power, how much storage that's being used, and then you get a fee each month for what you're using. The good news is they do have a calculator that kind of helps you forecast this. And you can even set alarms to let you know if you're approaching a certain budget that you've got on cost. There's a lot of things out there to help you do that. But that's the idea. You pay for what you use. Okay, now there is another couple of terms I want to mention as well. This next term is called Platform as a Service, and then there's a third term called Software as a Service. So Platform as a Service, PaaS, and Software as a Service. Platform as a Service and software. Let me explain software as a service first, because it's pretty easy to visualize, and then I'll explain platform as a service. So the idea of software as a service is basically they have applications that can be hosted in the cloud service, apps, if you will. These apps are 100% ready to use, ready for you to take advantage of. All you got to do is use those applications. Okay. For example, Microsoft has what's called Office for the web, or it used to be called Office Online. So that's like Microsoft Word, Excel, PowerPoint. You can run it from within your web browser. All you got to do is just jump right in and use it. So from an admin standpoint, all we have to do is assign the users that are allowed to use that, and they can go use it, and it's available to them 100%. All they got to do is start using it. There's not really a lot of administration for us. Now, what is Platform as a Service? Well, Platform as a Service is a system in which the majority of the configuration is done for us, but we still have some admin configuration we have to do to use it. For example, with virtual machines, this is 100% IaaS. A virtual machine you can put whatever operating system on there, but you're responsible for the operating system. You're responsible for the software that goes on it. You as an admin have to manage all that. Okay. With Platform as a Service, virtual machines are set up in the background that you don't have any control over. They've already put the operating system on there. They've already put the software on there. You don't have any control over any of that. But there's still some administration you have to do in order to control it. For example, Microsoft has a directory service called Azure AD. Now, this is a big deal. This is probably one of the biggest deals of the things I've gone over so far in this cloud. Azure Active Directory is what we call a platform as a service. It is a directory service that is sort of the cloud version of what you have here called ADDS. So, now I remember when I first heard about Azure Active Directory, I thought, oh, well, this is just like you're just hosting virtual domain controllers in the cloud. No, they have completely redone the concepts of Active Directory. It is completely redone with all new web-based programming languages. It does not use any of the dated stuff like LDAP and Kerberos and all that. It uses industry standard authentication protocols in order to support all the latest and greatest features and capabilities in the cloud. Okay, and so these are where users, passwords, all of that stuff is going to be managed in the cloud. But it starts out with almost nothing in it. So it's ready to use, but you as an admin have to start creating users and all of that. Now you might say, well, wait a minute, what if I want to use my on-premise users in the cloud? Well, stand by, I'll explain that in a second. Anyway, Azure AD is a platform as a service. So is, here's another one, Exchange Online. Microsoft has Exchange Online. That is actually both a platform as a service and a software as a service, in that the admin side of it is the platform as a service, but the user side is the software as a service. Same thing for SharePoint Online. Microsoft has SharePoint Online as well. Same idea there. All right. And then you've got Microsoft Teams. That's the admin side of that is a platform as a service, but the user side of that is a software as a service. There is OneDrive for Business. That's a cloud storage that we have access to that allows users to store their data out there in the cloud. There is a product called Intune, which is Microsoft's MDM product. MDM, it's also MAM product, so it's both. Mobile device management, that allows us to manage devices. This is one of the most powerful things we have available to us. This is what sort of is replacing the concept of GPOs. This is going to allow us to manage our device settings. Not only can we manage on-premise devices, but we can manage mobile devices. GPOs can only manage devices for Windows. With Intune, we can manage Windows, Android, iOS, iPadOS, macOS, all that stuff. With the help of Intune, we can manage the settings and restrictions. We can deploy software. This is a very, very powerful product, okay, that we have available to us. It even has a thing called autopilot, which will allow us to reconfigure Windows machines and all of that. So very, very powerful stuff that we have available to us. All right. Now, I will tell you that Azure has, Azure definitely has some of the, it has some platform as a service technologies and some software as a services technologies, but the main type of system that Microsoft has created for platform as a service and software as a service is called Microsoft 365. Okay, Microsoft 365. All right, which I forgot to add to my display here. We actually do have apps that are called the Microsoft 365 apps. All right, which formerly they would call them Office 365 apps. They're now, starting to call them Microsoft 365 apps. But the Microsoft 365 services it is a cloud service that basically sits on top of Azure. So you have Azure in the background of all this, and the Microsoft 365 sitting on top of it. All right, you can't have a Microsoft 365 account or tenant that doesn't also have Azure. Azure is in the background no matter what. And the other thing to be aware of is both of these share Azure AD. So you'll notice that there are web portals for creating users and things through Microsoft 365 or creating users through Azure. It all ties back to Azure AD. You're going to see the same users no matter what. So these two things are glued together basically. Okay, they're glued together. Now on Microsoft 365 with PaaS and SaaS and all that, you're not really going to be hosting virtual machines, but you're going to be working with these services. Let's just kind of color code some of this real quick. All right. Now again, I do want to add that Azure does have PaaS and SaaS services that I'm not getting into right now, but it's mainly an IaaS based service. That's its main focus. Microsoft 365 is strictly PaaS related and software as a service, SaaS related. It doesn't really have any virtual machines or any of that, though it can interact with them. Okay, so if I was to sort of draw a circle around some of these, all of this stuff you see here would be Azure related, and then all of this stuff you see right here would be the Microsoft 365 related. Now, they both share Azure AD, so I'm going to put a purple circle around that. Red and blue make purple. All right, and so they all link to that. Okay, and so that is how Microsoft handles those concepts. The other thing about With Azure, you're paying for the CPU, RAM, storage you use. With Microsoft 365, it's all based on licenses. So you purchase these subscriptions that have a certain amount of licenses, and you issue these licenses out to your users, and your users can take advantage of these various features. Okay. One more thing I want to explain here, and that is, what about the issue of what if we want to use our on-premise users to access resources in Azure? Well, Microsoft has a solution for that. They actually have a type of server that you can set up, and the server is called an Azure AD Connect server. Azure AD Connect. Now, what does this do? An Azure AD Connect server, this is a synchronization-based system, and what it will do is it will allow my on-premise users to be synchronized out to Azure AD. Now, it does not allow Azure AD users to be synced in, only out, but it will allow user passwords and all of that to be synced in. So if a user is logging on to Azure AD and they change their password out in the cloud, it does have the ability to synchronize that password back in. But the beauty of this is by going this route, if you have this on-premise environment, you can achieve what we call SSO. What is SSO? Single sign-on. The idea of single sign-on with all of this is my user can sit down at their on-premise computer, they can log on, and it's going to log them on both in the cloud as well, it's going to log them on-premise as well as in the cloud at the same time. All right, and they can access resources out there. The other thing I'll tell you is that Microsoft has moved into a way to where you could technically not even have a domain nowadays. You don't necessarily have to have a domain. In fact, it pains me to say this as a consultant because, I have fed my family for, 2 decades by using Active Directory, both teaching it as well as, consulting on it. But I'll be honest, Microsoft is now moving in a direction to where domains are not even needed anymore. They're now making it possible to where everything can be managed through your cloud service and domains are not needed. But if you're a company that's already got a domain and all this is still in place and all of that, then this Azure AD Connect server is going to be the thing that's going to help you. Okay? All right. Well, hopefully this has now helped you have a better understanding. This was really just a fundamentals video to help you understand the cloud service, the concepts of it, and I hope that this has been helpful to you. Let's spend a few moments now talking about and understanding the Microsoft IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS offering technologies that we have in our Microsoft Cloud Services. Now, to begin with, you have IaaS. This is Infrastructure as a Service. Now, the concept of Infrastructure as a Service is to offer computing power to companies that are looking to move things out in the cloud and allow a cloud company to host these services for them online. So instead of, again, you setting up your own physical servers in your environment or even setting up physical servers and then setting up virtual servers in your environment and offering those servers to your clients, in this case, you can host all of that out in Microsoft's cloud services, which is mostly Azure, right? Azure is their main infrastructure as a service technology. Okay, and of course, there are concepts in which with IaaS where we can host virtual servers, virtual machines, have virtual guest operating systems running on there, and then have these services made available to our users. And they can even offer some other types of things on top of their IaaS service. And then, of course, that's where it sort of plays upon SaaS, which is software as a service, and PaaS, which is platform as a service. But I'll expand on those coming up here in just a moment. Now, the idea of this, though, is they're going to be offering you their data center, their buildings, their air conditioning and power, and their massive amount of redundancy that they provide. Microsoft can actually provide you with an insane amount of redundancy, especially for your data. In other words, if something happens to their servers, their equipment, their data center, whatever it is, Microsoft has an extreme amount of redundancy there that they're going to provide you as part of their SLA, which is their service level agreement. Okay, you get a minimum of a 99.9% of the time, but when you start getting up into the storage area of Azure, they actually offer up to 15 nines of actual redundancy. So basically, in a month's period, your downtime should be microseconds, not even noticeable, if you actually pay for that extra redundancy. So with IaaS and having all these data centers, you're talking, they've got something like 60-something regions, 60-something areas of the world where they've got data centers. In most of those regions, they have at least 3 data centers that they're dealing with. So you're talking an extreme amount of equipment here, an extreme amount of redundancy. And of course, with that comes all the equipment being able to offer you CPU, RAM, storage, network. And that's really what IaaS is all about. You're paying for the computing power, the CPU, the RAM, the storage, the networking, and you're paying for what you use, essentially, okay? In regards to that computing power, CPU, RAM, storage. They provide other services such as firewall and load balancing, and essentially Microsoft will host virtual appliances out there, just like where in a physical network you would buy physical equipment to do these jobs. Well, with IaaS, they're offering you the virtualization of it all. They're virtualizing equipment and making that available, and you basically pay for what you use. You pay a monthly fee for what you use. Now, there's also PaaS. Some people will just pronounce it PaaS, Platform as a Service. Now, Platform as a Service, this is a step up from IaaS. So they're handling the data center, the equipment, the air conditioning, and power and redundancy, the networking, storage, virtual appliance, the storage of all of it, the operating systems themselves, and they can even provide you with the tools you need to host applications and provide services of your own. So they're providing some actual platforms, databases, and web-based portals and interfaces to do this. Okay, Office 365, for example, Microsoft 365 itself, Microsoft 365 being a platform as a service, Office 365 is partly a platform as a service, but also Office 365 is a software as a service. But essentially what they're doing with PaaS is they're offering this web-based platform for managing applications and giving people access in different instances of that platform as a service can be offered to your users, or even if you are some kind of a service provider yourself, you could offer these to your customers. And so the idea is with a platform as a service is anybody that is a tenant, which is somebody that is subscribed to the Microsoft services, can get an instance of a particular platform that they can use, the Microsoft 365 services being a platform that they can use. Now, the funny thing about platforms as a service as well is some of it can be pay as you go, pay for what you use, and some of it is just based on licenses. So it's kind of a mix. You'll have part of it being geared more towards IaaS, which is paying for what you use, and then another chunk of it is paying for just a license to use certain tools and get access to certain things, as we have with Office 365 and the Microsoft 365 services themselves. Now, again, the Microsoft 365 service, the big platform used to be called Office 365, and then they changed the name over the last couple of years to Microsoft 365, being the main PaaS platform. And that's where the confusion comes, because now they're saying what they were saying is Office 365 is a platform as a service and a software as a service, which you still can say that, but now what they've done is they're saying that Microsoft 365 is their main platform as a service. Office 365 is sort of a mix, but the app side of Office 365 is geared more towards SaaS, which I'll talk about in just a moment. So again, the key to understanding PaaS, platform as a service, is Microsoft in this case is offering a whole set of web-based platform tools that you can configure yourself. It's an instance of all of these tools and all these services. You can configure them yourselves. They offer databases and everything to go with them. And then you can use them for your own environment. Some of the cost is going to involve pay for what you use, and some of it is going to involve just paying a licensing fee for whichever services that you're going to be using. They provide all sorts of things. For example, Kubernetes. If you've never heard of Kubernetes, it allows you to generate these things called containers and do orchestration of containers, managing instance of these virtualized containers on the fly. So imagine if you were a company that wanted to host a bunch of web services, and you needed to be able to scale those web services to an ungodly amount, meaning, for example, in part of the year, maybe you're an e-commerce company, and you do sales online, and you have a certain amount of customers that are hitting your website throughout the year, but then all of a sudden the holiday season hits, and then you're getting way more hits than you used to. Kubernetes is a platform as a service that can actually scale out your web services into these little things called containers, and it can generate them very fast and a large amount of them to handle the amount of load that you've got coming in from, say, web services. And then, of course, holiday season ends, and maybe you're not getting the amount of load that you used to get. It can scale it back. Okay. The other thing Platform as a Service brings to the table is a lot of development tools. So if you're a developer company and you're developing software, they offer everything you need for handling all of that. So Platform as a Service, definitely kind of a cross between IaaS and SaaS in the way that it's implemented. And finally, understanding SaaS, sometimes referred to as SaaS. All right. So software as a service is offering a piece of software as a service that's going to be maintained by Microsoft. Their big software as a service is Office 365, which again, the confusing part of that is that has always been also a platform as a service as well. So I know that's a little bit confusing. Now what they're sort of getting at is that they're saying, okay, well, Microsoft 365, even though Office 365 is part of Microsoft 365, it's a platform as a service. And then Office 365, if you're speaking purely about, deploying Word, Excel, and PowerPoint and all that, that is SaaS. Okay. So yes, if I was to ask you the question, is Office 365 software as a service? I would say yes, it is. Is it also a platform as a service? Yes. However, if you're purely talking about the management of Word and Excel and PowerPoint and all these apps, then you would just purely be thinking in regards of software as a service. So I know that it walks a line of being both sides, but you can technically say that Office 365 is SaaS, software as a service. Okay, so software as a service means that the cloud provider is handling everything, including the application itself, and basically you are paying to use that application, or if you will, you're renting that application to be used over the web or to get access to it. And even downloadable software can be seen as software as a service. So for example, with Office 365, you can have a license for that. You can download the Office apps, which is called Apps for Enterprise, formerly known as Pro Plus, and you basically have access to all these applications that you can download and you can use. Word, Excel, PowerPoint, all of that you can download and you can use. And of course, if you don't pay your monthly license fee, then eventually your software will get deactivated. Okay, so that's how that works with software as a service. So it can be a web-based software that you get access to, that you pay usually a monthly fee to get to, or it can be a downloadable app. Okay, in most cases, software as a service is you pay a license fee to get access to it, as opposed to paying like the CPU, the storage, the RAM, all of that stuff. Okay, all right. So hopefully that gives you guys a good understanding now of the differences in regards to IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS in the Microsoft cloud environment. Now, if you are a little newer to some of the Microsoft administration in the cloud service, I want to spend a little bit of time real quick just showing you a brief overview of administration using some of the different tools that we have available to us. So the first example I'm going to give you is administering Microsoft 365 services using the Microsoft Admin Center portal. So we're going to go to portal.microsoft.com, and right out of the gates here, you'll notice that it starts out with a little bit of a dashboard here, and then we have a few options over here on the left side of the screen. All right, so these options are sometimes referred to as blades. This little funky icon here is usually referred to as the waffle, kind of a funny name for it. And this guy right here, the menu bar, and some people call that the burger. I guess it's supposed to look like a hamburger, I don't know. But anyway, this is going to be your main menu bar here. And you'll notice that you've got home, which will take you back here. You've got your users drop down where you can manage users, contacts, guests, deleted users, groups. So this is where you're going to manage your groups. Of course, your billing and all that fun stuff is going to happen here, where you can see licenses and billing. And you have a setup option here as well, which has some of the basic setup configurations you can do when you first set your tenant up. But one thing I recommend doing is clicking Show All. This little ellipse symbol here, that little 3-dot symbol is called the ellipse symbol, because you can see everything. There's a support area. There's a little settings symbol here where you can manage DNS domains, Microsoft Search. You've got the org settings, which is your entire organization for your tenant that you've set up. Add-ons, partner relationships, a bunch of things here. A lot of this stuff, as we go through here, we are going to be talking about it more in depth. So I'm not really explaining everything in depth right now. We're just kind of looking at an overview here. I've got reports that I can look at. I've got health that helps me determine what the service health is of Microsoft 365. And then below that, you have different admin centers. So you have the security center here, which is going to take you into an area called the Security Compliance Center, which is where a lot of the security controls of Microsoft 365 are going to be managed, like data loss prevention and things like that. Compliance is called the Compliance Center. It's going to take you and focus just on the compliance side of security. You have Endpoint Manager, which is going to work in conjunction with Intune, as well as Microsoft's Endpoint Configuration Manager. You have Azure Active Directory, which is actually going to take you over to the Azure AD Portal. This is going to bring you right here into Exchange Online. This is where you'd go to administer Exchange Online. SharePoint Online, Teams. This is the Teams Admin Center. Keep in mind, some of this may not show up if your tenant is brand new. You may need to wait about 15-20 minutes. If you just created a tenant, some of these things won't show up. So make sure you understand that, all right? And there's also the All Admin Centers area here, which just kind of gives you every admin center that Microsoft 365 gives you access to. Okay, so those are your sort of basics of the administration, jumping in and looking at users and groups and all that fun stuff. All that can be done right through this little Microsoft 365 Admin Center. So now I want to look at the Azure portal, so we can kind of look at Azure AD and talk about some of the administration we can do on that side of things. So if I actually type portal.azure.com, that's going to bring us over to the Azure portal. All right, which is where Azure Services is all going to be managed. And then I'm going to click the little menu bar here, little menu button, and I'm going to click down on Azure AD because that's what we're going to be mostly focusing on here. And this is, of course, where you can manage users and groups. Keep in mind that even in Microsoft 365 services, they're storing their users and everything over here in the Azure AD. So this is all the same. So if I create a user, for example, here under the users blade, it's going to be reflected over on Microsoft 365 side of things as well because, well, it's all kept in Azure AD. Same for my groups, okay? As well as working with things like roles, my devices, licenses, and all that. So I can actually see the licenses and stuff here, just like I can over on the Microsoft 365 side of things. Password settings can all be controlled here. The main thing to get across here is that even with Microsoft 365 services, it's keeping all of its user accounts, passwords, groups, all that stuff, all over here on Azure AD. So really the two things are connected. But there are going to be a few things you can only do on this side in order to accomplish certain tasks. For example, if I'm going to be setting up what is known as Azure AD Connect, where I'm going to be synchronizing my on-premise environment with the cloud and all of that, I'm going to be doing that over here, okay? This is where I'm going to be managing all that, okay? So hopefully that just gives you a kind of a quick look. Maybe you don't have a lot of experience working with this, or maybe it's been a while since you've been in this neck of the woods. So this gives you a chance to sort of get back in there and kind of click around. You're welcome to, if you've set up a tenant, you're welcome to kind of click through and look at some of the different things you have. Keep in mind, I'm going to be talking about a lot more as we go on. This was just a quick overview for you of jumping over into Azure AD and having a look. Let's talk now about some of the cloud-based productivity solutions that we have in our Microsoft 365 environment. Now, we're starting out here on admin.microsoft.com, same thing as portal.microsoft.com. So if you want to take a look at it, that's where you're going to go. Now, this being the main admin center, this is sort of the behind the scenes area where we're able to manipulate things in our Microsoft 365 environment. Now, just looking to the left over here, we've got this little show all ellipse symbol. We're going to go ahead and click on that. And if we scroll down, you can see these different admin centers, okay? From security and compliance, which is going to involve managing the security side of the Microsoft 365 world, endpoint manager, which brings us into what's known as mobile device management. We have Azure Active Directory, which gets into our directory services, which is where our users and groups and all that lives. And then that brings us into Exchange. This is where the Exchange Online is, where we can manage our emails, our user mailboxes. We have SharePoint, which is where we can manage SharePoint sites for SharePoint Online. And of course, Teams for Teams collaborations, okay? And then of course, we can get into all admin centers, and it'll show us that there's even more there that we can take a look at. But I want to jump over, before we get too deep into that, I want to jump over and talk about how an average Joe user that is using the Microsoft 365 environment, how they're actually going to get in and access a lot of the stuff that's going on. Now, probably one of the easiest places for a user to go and access the different applications that have been made available to them is going to be portal.office.com. So let's go there. Okay, we're going to open up a new browser tab. We're going to go to portal.office.com and log on. All right. And so now that we logged on to this, if we look over to the left, we can see our different applications that are available to us. Word, Excel, PowerPoint, all that. We click the little waffle symbol here, that little symbol being called the waffle. We can expand all that, and we can even click on all apps and see what else is available to us. Okay, so clearly you can see from a productivity standpoint, a user has a lot of these online applications available for them to use right out of the gates. Okay, they do have to have a license, but I'm not going to get into licensing right now. But as you can see, all of these different applications that are made available to them, from Delve and video, calendar, bookings, Dynamics, Excel, so on and so forth, the rest of the Office applications that are available. There's Teams for using Teams online. Okay, they've got Outlook if they want to check their email. All right. So again, from a user standpoint, this is going to be the place to go, a very simple place to go, where all of their apps that have been made available to them are right there and ready for them to use. Now, on the flip side, if the user has a license to download the Office applications, now this is called an Apps for Enterprise license. Also, it used to be called Pro Plus, so be advised that you may still see references to this known as Pro Plus. This allows you to download Office 365. So a user can come over here. If they're sitting in front of a computer, they want to download Office, they can go right here where it says Install Office, okay? And then from there, they can go ahead and click to download. So they click this right here. It's going to show up in this case, depending upon your web browser, in the lower part of your screen, and it's going to allow the user to install the Office application. So again, from a user standpoint, this is going to be the place to go. Now we are, in this case, I am an administrator, so you'll also notice that I have this admin option here. A regular user doesn't have this option, but as an administrator, I can administer these productivity apps, and this is going to bring me back over to admin.microsoft.com, also known as portal.microsoft.com. Okay, so again, we're back now at looking at the behind the scenes area of everything. Okay, so that kind of gives you like a front end, back end look of the Microsoft 365 services and the cloud productivity on behalf of your user. Again, from your user standpoint, they're not really going to be messing around with this area. They're going to be focused more on the portal.office.com area and getting access to their applications and all that. Keep in mind, and I'm not going to get into the details of this right now, but keep in mind that once we start managing our cloud services, we can allow applications and all that to be downloaded to their machines, and we can control those applications as well. So this is the beauty of it all. It used to be that we had to use group policies and all that in a Microsoft domain to control things, but actually with the cloud services, we can have these applications be controlled. They download applications and get access to these applications. We can control the downloadable versions of them and what they can and cannot do. We can control these web-based versions of these applications as well. So these web versions, by the way, of Office, they're called Office for the web. They used to also call this Office Online. So we have complete control of all of this. Again, not getting into all the depth of it yet here, but we have control. We can control what they can and cannot do. We can control what they can and cannot get access to. I want to talk a little bit about Dynamics 365 now. First off, what is Microsoft Dynamics 365? So Microsoft Dynamics 365, this is actually a whole suite of different products and services that are sort of rolled all into one here. It's a set of business-based applications that the goal of it is to sort of help run your whole business from start to finish. It provides you with all the software, analytic insight information. It even provides artificial intelligence-based insights in helping you get the general foundation and management of your environment, of your business. Now, it basically breaks into three main categories. The first category being sales. Okay, so the goal is to try to provide a way for businesses to have the ability to perform digital selling, provide you with all the tools and services that are needed, and that includes connecting you to things like social media services such as LinkedIn, all that. Provide you with all of the processes and tools to sort of seamlessly handle everything for you and automate things as much as possible. Another thing, of course, is tracking sales information and trying to discover what's working and what's not working for a business. Okay, and the ultimate goal, obviously, here is to always try to keep providing more profitability for that company. Make sure that they're always profitable and have a way for your company to track that. And another thing is to have a system that's constantly evolving and scaling up and providing you with new solutions to new issues that arise. And so Dynamics is an ever-changing set of products. Another part of it is, of course, your Dynamics 365 Customer Intelligence. This is CRM-based customer relationship management, and the goal there, of course, is to try to give you as many insights as you possibly can into your customers, provide customer information, make things easily accessible to look at your customers' information and build these relationships and provide as many tools for building relationships, I should say, as you can. This is important in that it provides insights as well as it helps figure out, again, what's working with certain customers and what's not. Okay, and then the last key ingredient to this, of course, is Dynamics 365 Marketing, and the goal there, of course, is when you are trying to market to your customers, you want to, again, know what's working and what's not. So this is another one that's providing insights, analytical data, and help you figure out what types of customers respond better to certain types of advertising marketing versus others. Okay, another thing, of course, is to understand what type of language and lingo seems to work with certain customers and prioritize your leads based on the marketing insights that you've gained. So Dynamics 365 is connected now with Azure and Azure services, meaning that it's hosted completely out in the cloud. It provides this platform software as a service that's going to help you basically make it easier for getting access to all of these tools and overseeing all of this instead of a downloaded product that you're running on premises is all, of course, running out in the cloud. And so it provides a huge set of tools and products and services that are going to make your life for managing CRM-based systems a whole lot easier. Let's talk about the concepts of creating and managing user identities. Now, if you've been in the industry for a while, you may know that Microsoft has always kind of referred to users as user accounts, but over the last few years, Microsoft has started to make a shift in their terminology. One of the things that they now say is this term identity. And so they look at it as the concept of, well, a person has an identity, and that identity is going to be tied to multiple accounts. And so you have the concept of a user account that is on-premise, such as with ADDS, Active Directory Domain Services. You have cloud accounts, such as an Azure AD account. And then, of course, you have accounts with other third-party providers, AWS, all of that. And things can get a little crazy when you think about that concept of, oh my God, I've got all these different accounts. You have an identity, but you have all these different accounts that you're trying to utilize. And so one of the things that Microsoft has been really trying to push, and you've probably heard this acronym before, is this concept of SSO. SSO is single sign-on. Okay, and so if you are in that kind of situation where you do have like an on-premise Active Directory, and you've also got Azure AD, you can still achieve SSO. If you were to tie your ADDS, your on-premise Active Directory, with your Azure AD cloud service, you can still achieve SSO. In fact, there is a thing called Seamless SSO, in which if we set up this thing called Azure AD Connect and tie our connections, our directory services together, again, both on-premise Active Directory and the cloud, that becomes what is known as a hybrid scenario. And in a hybrid scenario where you're connecting those two together, you can essentially make it where you can put your user credentials in. Let's say you're logging onto a computer on-premise, and it will authenticate you to your Microsoft domain as well as to Azure AD at the same time. Okay, and so essentially you have the same user account information and same password information, and it synchronizes it. You've even got this thing called the password write-back feature, where if you change your password out on the cloud, it'll synchronize back to your on-premise account. So it's a really neat system, and the idea there is to try to make that not so scary to people, of that whole concept of, oh no, I've got to have all these different accounts to use these different services. And there's even this thing known as federation, in which you can authenticate your user account against other third-party services out there, like Amazon and all of that. So they're using this concept of identity in that, I've got this one identity, and I've got all these different accounts, but I can sign in to all of them at one time instead of me having to memorize lots and lots of user names and passwords and all that. Okay, and of course, the big fear there, the big argument always with single sign-on is, well, the advantage of single sign-on is also the disadvantage, which is, if somebody learned my one account password and user information, then they could basically get access to all my services. But the counter argument to that is that, remember, we now have the ability to use multi-factor authentication. So we can pair our password with other means of authentication, such as linking it with our cell phones, linking it with an app, and you can use biometrics, facial recognition and fingerprint matching and all that. So there's a lot of extra added security that we can enable if we want, that'll really improve and strengthen our defenses as far as somebody stealing our identity information and getting access to our accounts. Okay, now there's multiple ways to manage identities when it comes to our cloud services. You have the portal.azure.com, which is where Azure AD is going to be. And essentially, you just natively go to portal.azure.com, click the menu bar, and you can go to Azure Active Directory, and you can create manage users groups and all of that there. And then there is the Microsoft 365 Admin Center, which you can get to by going to admin.microsoft.com, also known as portal.microsoft.com, and you can create and manage user accounts there also. And then, of course, if you have a hybrid environment where you have an on-premise Active Directory domain services, ADDS, and you've set up Azure AD Connect, and you've got that hybrid setup, you can basically create your accounts on-premise, and they'll synchronize out to Azure AD. Now, remember, first off and foremost, Azure AD is connected with Microsoft 365 services. So you're not creating like an account in Azure AD, an account in Microsoft 365, and an account on the domain. No. First off, Azure AD is the directory services that all of the Microsoft cloud services use. Okay. But on premise, you have a different directory. You have ADDS, Active Directory Domain Services. So you create an account there, and it will basically synchronize out to the cloud. It will create you in a cloud account. So you will have two accounts, but they'll work as though they were one. So it won't interact like there's only, there's multiple accounts. It'll work like there's only one account. And again, you change your password, it's gonna be synchronized and all that. Change information, it's gonna get synchronized. Now, the final way that we can manage accounts is to use PowerShell. PowerShell is Microsoft's command line environment that you can write scripts and you can automate things. And of course, you have to connect. You have to have the Azure and Microsoft 365 commands. You have to download those, and then at that point, you connect to the cloud service. And then you can basically create accounts and all of that from within PowerShell. Now, as far as licensing and roles, let's talk a little bit about that. So when you subscribe to your Azure, your Microsoft 365 services, you have licenses that you get. You get basically like a subscription, Office 365, E3, E5, whatever it may be. And then from there you have licenses. For however many licenses you've purchased, if you purchase 25 licenses, you can license the 25 license out to your users. You can enable a license or disable a license. You can enable all of the license or just part of it. So for example, if I was to give out Office 365 E5 and I did not want somebody having access to Exchange email or something, I could disable that. Or the Office downloadable apps, I could disable that. Another thing we've got is we have roles. Roles are how we give out permissions. We give out rights to our fellow admins, and in Azure, how you give out rights and permissions to your users. So a role is basically an object in the cloud that has rights to something, and then we can assign that to users and groups and then give them those privileges. Okay, so hopefully that gives you now an understanding of a little bit about the user management and a little bit of a foundation as far as licenses and roles go. Okay, so let's take a look at the different portals and how we're going to manage user accounts through those portals. So I'm just going to we'll start with portal.azure.com. We'll put that in. As you can see, it's loading up Azure. Now what we're going to do, we're going to take a look at the menu bar. This is a little guy right here. It's called the menu bar. I'm going to drop that down, and I'm going to click on Azure AD. All right, from there, as you can see, I can go right over here and click on Users, and I can see all the different users that have been created in my environment. If I want to go ahead and create a user, I can simply say New User. This is one of the activities you could be asked to perform. So if I wanted to create a user named Aaron 365, I'm going to say this person's name is Aaron Jones. Might help if I spelled that right. We'll say Aaron Jones. So you put the username in. You can auto-generate the password. You can say, let me choose the password. You can also show what password's been auto-generated if you want. Okay. Now, if you want to assign it to a group, you can do that here, or you can assign it to a role here, or you can do that later down the road. Okay, you can also, of course, block the sign-in if you want. Don't allow the user to log in just yet. You also can assign a usage location. Now, I'm going to tell you guys that it's very important that if you're going to start assigning licenses to your user, you need to assign a usage location. You cannot assign any licenses to your users unless they have a usage location. You'll get an error if you try to do that. So pretty important you do that. I don't know why they don't make that mandatory through here. They do in the Microsoft 365 portal, they just don't here. So then you can do job title, department, you can specify those attributes, and that's about it. That's about all they let you do there. So we'll just say create. We created our user if we want. We've got our user now set up, and away we go. Now, that is through the Microsoft 365 portal. Again, we can, or through the Azure portal. If we want, we can click on this user account again. We can edit more of their information. Right here, job info, settings, here's contact information, all that good stuff. If we want to assign a role, we click on assign roles, and we can assign this user a role here. We want to assign groups, we can assign groups here. I'm going to have a lesson on groups coming up, so you guys will see that as well. Okay, so that's going to be done through the Azure portal. As you can see, pretty easy, pretty straightforward. Let's take a look at the admin portal. Now, we'll start by going through portal.office.com. I'll just show you this real quick. If you go through portal.office.com, this is what a user sees when they go in and see all their Office Online apps. And then an administrator has this nice little icon here. So this is a way you can get into your admin center from portal.office.com, or you can simply just type admin.microsoft.com, and that's going to bring you in here that way as well. So then you have this nice little users drop down, and then we'll just click on active users, and you're going to see the exact same users here that you saw over in Azure AD. Essentially, they're tying to the same place. Okay, so then we would click add user. All right, add a user, and then of course you fill in the information here essentially the same way. So I'm going to say AA Alexander, just trying to keep all my, all right, Alexandra Smith, and then display name, username, Alexandra. Okay, simple enough. Password, you can say let me choose a password. Same thing we did a little earlier. It's going to check to make sure it's available. We would click next. This is where we could assign some of our product licenses and all that, okay, if I wanted to. So notice you can do a few more things here. This is why I say that the Microsoft 365 portal is a little bit more intuitive than what we had on the Azure portal. But as you'll get into the Azure portal and you start editing the user, you can do a lot there. There's a few more advanced features. Okay, so I could also choose not to license a product to this user right now if I want. Notice that it makes me choose a location. So if you don't assign this usage location, as I said earlier, then essentially what's going to happen is the user cannot be assigned any license. So they make you do that here through the Microsoft 365 portal. So I'm going to go ahead and click next. Here's where I could assign roles if I want. Next. And it's going to give me a chance to review everything and edit things if I want, and then I can click Finish Adding. Okay, from there, if I want to edit the user, I can simply click on the user, and I can go through here and edit things, just like I could with the Azure portal. So if I want to, assign groups, roles, things like that through here, I can. Here's groups, here's roles, and again, we're going to talk more about some of that as we get a little deeper in. Okay, so pretty straightforward, pretty, like I said, intuitive, easy to manage. I'd now like to dive in and take a look at our Microsoft 365 Admin Center and specifically analyze our different user settings that we've got under the Users Blade. Now, we are on admin.microsoft.com, also known as portal.microsoft.com, and that's going to bring you to this area here. And if you look to the left, we've got the users drop down that we can utilize. So we're going to drop that down, and we've got active users. So we can click on active users, and we can see the different users that we've got, different users that are created. And of course, we can add a user. We can also use what's called user templates. If we click on user template, we can say add a template. And if you say add a template, you can create an example of a template. So for example, they give an example of like a senior engineer template, add a description, And then it says publish this template, make the template available to other admins who manage users. Okay, so the idea here is we can create a template. This template would be for a senior engineer position as we're using their example. And then what happens is you can copy that template if you needed to. So we're publishing the template, making it available to other admins, selecting our domain name, which is going to be examlabpractice.com. Specify a password. We could say, let me choose the password. Require the user to change password at next sign on, first sign on, and then we can click next. We can select our licensing information if we want to, what applications that are available. Okay, or we can just say don't license the user. Okay, of course, in the real world, I probably would license the user, so I would probably say, you know, Office 365 license or something like that. I could turn off the licenses I don't want for this template. Then I would click next. Any roles I want to specify or profile info. Next, and then finish adding. So from there, what I can now do is I can actually add a user account using that template. Okay, so that's kind of neat. That's one of the features that you get with it, using user templates. You can also say add multiple users if you want. Multiple users will enable you to download a CSV file, which is a spreadsheet. And then what you can do is you can fill that spreadsheet out. So if I open up Excel, for example, I can fill out this with a bunch of users if I wanted to. And then from there, I could, you know, create, let's say I add a bunch of users here. Username, for example, would be, let's say, John Smith. All right, and then first name John, last name Smith. Display name is John Smith. You could basically fill this out for each user. If you had like an HR department that had a spreadsheet, you could adjust the settings of that spreadsheet with all these users' names in it, and then you could actually import that into your cloud service, and at that point you would actually have all of those users created for you within the cloud service. This is really handy, especially if your company hires a bunch of new people. Let's say they hire like 50 new people and you got to create these users very quickly. If you had a spreadsheet with all their information in it, then that would really make things easier. It's also a scenario maybe in which perhaps your company buys another company, a smaller company, and if they had a spreadsheet that had all the user information in it, you could organize it in this format, and then at that point you could import it in to the cloud. All right, so you would just import it in right here. So that's another neat little thing you get. As you click on your users, like the A. Alex Jones user here, you can also modify the user settings if you want. So pretty simple, and make it pretty easy. And of course you can do this through Azure AD as well, but we're just looking at it through the Microsoft 365 portal here. But I can look at the account information. I can adjust these different settings that you see here. All right, add them to a group, roles. I can specify, look at devices this user is utilizing. This is actually in regards to something called Intune, which I'm not looking at the moment, but that is going to involve device management. We can look at licenses and the applications that this person has been given access to. Right now, they have this person has not been given any license, but if I wanted to give a license, I could. We can look at the email information. In order for this user, of course, to have an email account, they'd have to have an Exchange license, and that comes from having the Office 365, right? So we'd have to, you drop that down and take a look at it. They actually get email support through Exchange Online if they do that. So at that point, they can get an email address and all that. And you have OneDrive information. You have to have OneDrive. The person has to have a license. That Office 365 license that I'm giving the user would actually assign all of that. If I assign that and I hit Save Changes, then that would actually apply that license, and that user would have all of those features. You can reset the password here. You can also block the user from signing in if you want to sort of disable the user from being able to log in. And then if you want to delete the user, you could do that there. Okay. So once you've adjusted the settings, you would click Save, and at that point, you're good to go on that user. Okay. Of course, I can also modify multiple users at one time. All right. So you'll see that you click this little ellipse symbol, you can adjust some of these other settings, manage contact information, sign-in status. There's a few things there you can do in regards to your users. You can also do searches if you want as well. You can also clearly see which users have been assigned licenses and which ones have not by looking right here. All in all, pretty easy to use the user admin center from within Microsoft 365. Pretty intuitive. I think Microsoft's done a pretty good job of making it, pretty easy to use and click around and be able to edit those settings very quickly. A big push for getting your services in the cloud is definitely going to involve productivity and teamwork. Now, Microsoft is really big on trying to make an intuitive system for your users to start using the cloud immediately and collaborating with each other on different projects and teams that they're involved in. Now, Microsoft provides some different services to do this. One of their biggest services, obviously, is Teams. Now, from a Teams standpoint, if we start out here on portal.microsoft.com, also known as admin.microsoft.com, the Microsoft 365 Admin Center, if we look over to the left, we can click Show All, and you'll notice we have a Teams blade here. This is the Teams Administrative Center that's going to let us sort of administer the behind the scenes of what's going on in Teams. So we're going to go ahead and click on that. We're going to open that up first. And again, here we are loading up the behind the scenes side of Teams. Okay. So first time coming in, it's going to try to get you to take a tour and all that. But over here on the left, you can see all these different blades for the management of Teams. Now, if we go to the front end side of Teams, which is going to involve the user view of Teams, you'll notice this is what the user is going to interact with. Now, I want to jump over and look at that, and then we're going to kind of pop back and forth between the two. So if we go to portal.office.com, remember that is the front end side of things for users. Here we are in Office 365, and again, clicking on the waffle, we can see all the apps, and then there's Teams. We can go ahead and click on Teams. Okay. Now, interestingly enough, with Teams is Microsoft's big collaboration tool. It's what's replaced Skype for Business and all of that. It's for instant messaging, web conferences, video conferencing, screen sharing, and it's built specifically for working as a team, working on projects together and all that. Now, there's two main ways that a user interacts with this. This is going to be they can download the Windows app itself, the actual Teams app. They can also get it on their phones, tablets, or you can say use the web app instead. The interesting thing about the web app is it is very close to the downloadable app. So the two are almost identical. So you can use them very interchangeably. I'm going to use the web app. And as you can see, here it is. It's going to show me around Teams. And jumping into Teams, I just have one basic team here that I'm a part of, and that is the Exam Lab Practice team, which is the name of my organization, Exam Lab Practice, which relates to examlabpractice.com. But I have general. These are called channels that I can interact on if I want. So I don't really have much going on in my team right now. I don't really have a lot of people involved in my team, but I can see all my activity. I can look at chat messages here. I can see all the teams that I've got, which again, I've only got one. I've got a calendar, so if I'm collaborating with other people, we can schedule meetings and all of that. And this will also involve Microsoft Exchange Online and SharePoint and all that also. So that's really cool. Here's calls. So if I'm calling somebody, I've got files that can be shared back and forth. Now, interestingly enough, there's a couple other components to all this. You have Teams for instant messaging, calls, collaborating, and you can post files, and your files can be linked into OneDrive for Business. Okay, so that's Microsoft's online storage platform. Okay, they're sort of software and platform as a service service that they're offering you. In this case, being a software as a service, even though it is a platform behind the scenes, it's offered as software as a service. Now, we can upload files and all that. Now, what's also really cool about all of this is it also links us into SharePoint. So if you come back over and look at portal.office.com, you also have SharePoint. And so SharePoint being a place where we can also collaborate, we can post images and make employee websites or web tutorials, allow us to post messages, make a bulletin board. And what's really neat about all this is it all links together. So we go into Teams, we can instant messages and web call and share a calendar. We can post bulletin messages up on SharePoint, and our files all get stored in our OneDrive for Business account. Okay, so it's really nice how everything is sort of linked together and makes team collaboration a whole lot easier. And again, from an admin standpoint, we have our admin portals over here for controlling everything. So as you can see, Teams and SharePoint. If I pull up SharePoint here, let's pull that up real fast here. You'll also notice that I've got a OneDrive Admin Center here as well. So SharePoint, this is the behind the scenes side of SharePoint. I'm not getting into all the depth of all of the drop downs and all that right now. I just want to introduce you to the behind the scenes side of all of this. But this is where I'm going to control SharePoint and my OneDrive if I want, the OneDrive files. All right. And again, I showed you that we have the behind the scenes of Teams as well. So a lot going on here. Obviously, there's a lot to learn here. We're not getting into all the details right now on all these drop downs, but this hopefully does give you kind of a look at as far as the productivity and management of Teams collaborations and how it kind of all links together. You have Teams as sort of your core collaboration tool that your users are going to use. You have SharePoint for them to post images and actually have like an employee-based website where they can post things and share information if they want. And then, of course, the foundation of the files is all going to go in OneDrive. Okay, so that's how it all kind of fits together. Hopefully that gives you a better understanding of how all of that's going to work together. Now, in regards to managing, configuring our subscriptions in the Microsoft 365 world, it's important to know where all this is going to happen and how we can configure the options that are available to us. So here we are in portal.microsoft.com, or also known as admin.microsoft.com. And from there, I can drop down right here where it says billing. Okay. And a couple of things I can look at here. Number one, I can look at licenses. So if I click on licenses here, this is going to pop up what exact licenses that are available based on my subscription. All right, and as you can see, I have the Enterprise Mobility plus Security E5, and I have the Office 365 E5. Okay. Which are these are the main two that I have. These are the two you should have. Some of my lessons that I show you, I may have some other licenses, but these are the main two licenses that we'll need in order for us to kind of practice and play around with all this stuff. So as you can see, I can click on each one of these, and it shows me how many of these licenses are available. And if I wanted to assign a license to a user, for example, right now I could say assign a license. Okay, and that would allow me to assign a license to a particular user. Okay, of course you can also assign licenses to users directly on the user itself, or when you create the user if you want. Okay, but that's how many licenses I've got, right? You can also click on Manage Purchases if you want to see your products. But I want to look at Purchase Services here. So let's click on Purchase Services. And right here, we can really look at all the different options that are available to us, right? So right here, we have Microsoft 365. And here are the Microsoft 365 Business Premium. They tell you month to month. So different billing options that are available to us we can go with. You can look through these different billing options and some of the different things that you got, right? At that point, I also have Office 365. So there's Office 365 E5. Same thing. I have different payment options here that I can go with. You have the business apps available to you. And keep in mind, you can always click Details on any one of these, and you can see details on what you get. And it kind of gives you a breakdown, kind of like the website does. Although I like to look at it from the website standpoint. It gives me a good, more detailed breakdown than this does in some cases. But you can see what you're going to get. You can see what it's going to cost you. They tell you what the yearly plan is as well on that. All right, let me go back over here to purchase services. You can also, if you want, you can say to show me all, in this case 23. So I can scroll down now and I can see everything listed out here for Microsoft 365 if I want. All right. The other thing that's really cool about this is I can go through and compare. If I want to compare some of the things that I'm looking at here. So for example, if I wanted to compare, let's do E5, E3, I can say compare, come up here to the top and click on compare your products. It'll let you add 3 different products there that you can go with. All right, so it's going to go ahead now, it's going to create a comparison, and as you can see I now have a nice little breakdown. And that's something that you didn't really get out of the website that's kind of cool, is the ability to go through here and compare. Okay, so this is a great way for you to sort of evaluate what you got, and as far as being able to configure your subscription, you can go to your products and see what you've got, see what your licenses are, and you have the ability to assign licenses. Although I'll talk more about assigning licenses, but this is just in this regards, it's just looking to see what you get. Another thing too is, we looked at Office, 365 E5. The Office 365 E5 gives us, the Office products and all that. One thing you can do though that's kind of cool about this is you can see this information here, and you can see how it licenses out and all of that. But you can also, another way of doing this is to jump over to the Azure portal. So if you actually go to, let's go to portal.azure.com, as I like the way that this kind of shows you everything as well. And you can go to, click the little menu bar here, and then go down to Azure Active Directory. And then we're going to click on Licenses. So we'll go to Licenses. All right, and then from there, I can click All Products, and you can see the same 2 licenses we just saw. Okay, so I'm going to click on Office 365 E5, and then I'm going to click on Service Plan Details. And so notice that this kind of just breaks it down for me and tells me the different products that I'm getting out of the Office 365 E5 plan in this case. So here's all these things that I can assign to my users if I want. All right. Now, if I assign the whole entire license, they're going to get all of this, but I can actually enable, disable different things maybe that I don't want the user to have. Let's take a look real quick at the EMS subscription. So let's go back to Licenses, and then let's click on Enterprise Mobility Plus Security. This is a package that's full of security capabilities that you get with your Office, Microsoft 365, Office 365. So let's go to Service Plan Details, and here's all the things that I'm going to get with that subscription. So Azure AD Premium 1 and 2, ATP, Advanced Threat Protection, Information Protection Premium 1 and 2, Azure Rights Management, Azure Multi-Factor Authentication, Cloud App Security, Intune, all that. Keep in mind, we're going to go into more detail on a lot of this stuff as we move along, but this gives you a breakdown of what you're getting out of that. So it's important to understand what we've got with our subscription plans, as well as being able to look at some of the other plans that we could purchase. All right. So hopefully that gives you a good breakdown between the two, looking at the Microsoft 365 portal, the Azure portal, and kind of seeing what we've got. Mostly though, if you really want to compare things, you're going to have to do that over here on the Microsoft 365 side of things. Let's talk now about the concept of Azure Active Directory and some of the different versions that are available to you. Now, we know that Azure Active Directory is the directory services that we use in the Microsoft Cloud Services. So I don't care if you're talking purely just Azure, or you're talking Microsoft 365, Office 365, Exchange, SharePoint, Teams, all of these different cloud services in the Microsoft world utilize Azure Active Directory, okay? And even, of course, if you've got an on-premise ADDS, Active Directory Domain Services, and you're using a hybrid environment, you're still going to involve Azure AD if you are using cloud services with Microsoft. For the most part, unless you're integrating with AWS, Amazon Web Services, all that, which we're not getting into right now, you are using Azure AD. Azure AD is the foundation directory service that we use in our cloud services. Now, first thing I want to look at here with you is just the different versions of Azure AD that we have. Now, Microsoft is really good about keeping documents updated on their different technologies and capabilities. So what I encourage you to do is, go to your local search engine, Bing or Google or wherever, and then do a search on the following keywords. Just search Azure AD P1, P2, and Basic. All right. And Microsoft has a great article right here that gets into the different versions of Azure Active Directory, okay? So if we kind of look through here, you'll see this one. This is creating an account. We don't need to create an account, but we look at pricing right here. This article right here is the one that I want to look at. So we're going to go there to this pricing article. And again, you can do the same thing I just did if you want to pull this article up. And Microsoft shows you here that there are different versions of Azure Active Directory. Okay, so main thing I want to point out is we have a free version of Azure Active Directory, and you can see some of the different capabilities that you're going to get with it. Okay, and you look here, you've got support for 500,000 objects with the free version, single sign-on, user provisioning. You do federated authentication, user group management, device registration. So there's a lot of different features that you get even with the free version. So when you initially set up a free Azure Microsoft 365 account, okay, that's what you get. You get that completely free. It doesn't cost anything, and you get all of these different features that you're seeing here. Of course, once you get here to where it says external identities and all that, you start noticing the check marks start to drop off a little bit right here for free. And then if you look, you got another version called Office 365 Apps. Now, they used to call this Basic, so that's why a lot of times you'll see articles talk about the Azure AD Basic, and now it's called Office 365 Apps. So if you have an Office 365 license, then you get the Office 365 app version of Azure AD, and you get a slight increase on your features. So as you can see here, company branding, self-service password reset, improved service level agreement. Basically, with the free version, you're not really guaranteed availability, high availability with your user identities, but if you have this version or any of the later versions or the higher up versions of Azure AD, you do get all of that. Okay. You get device write back. This gets into if you're doing a hybrid environment between your on-premise ADDS, Active Directory Domain Services, and Azure AD, you can have device information written back to your on-premise environment. Of course, that's where things drop off if you have Office 365 Apps, again, also known as Basic, or I should say formerly known as Basic. Then we get into the premium versions of Azure AD. P1 and P2, Premium 1, Premium 2. Now, if you scroll all the way down to the bottom of this article, you'll notice that it shows the cost. Now, of course, the free version's free. The Office 365 app version comes with these different Office 365 licenses of subscriptions that you have. Okay, and then here is P1 and P2. Okay, so $6 a month, at least at the recording of this video. You got to remember Microsoft changes the prices periodically, but if you look at this article, you'll see the latest and greatest of that. Of course, this is looking at it from a United States dollar amount, but $6 per month, $9 per month for Premium 2. Now, if you look down, again, it kind of drops off here with the Office 365 app version, and that's where you start getting into some of these other features. Now, most of the other features, what you're going to notice with Premium is you get a bunch of extra security features. So if you want to know the big difference, it's going to involve security. Okay, so password protection, extra password protection, self-service password changes and unlocks, and on-premise write back for passwords if you have a hybrid environment, group access management, cloud app discovery. There's more mobile device management support, self-service BitLocker recovery for recovering BitLocker keys. So a bunch of extra things here that you're getting. You can see all of these different features here. In this course, we're not thoroughly getting into each and every one of these details right now, but some of the other courses that are out there definitely do. But as you can see here, you've got it drops off right here, okay, and it tells you that third-party identity governance, and that's where things stop. Now, with P1, you get all of those features. With P2, you get the rest of the features, and these are pretty awesome features. Vulnerability and risk accounts, risk event investigation, risk-based conditional access policies. So what am I getting for this extra $3 a month per user? Okay, well, basically Microsoft uses artificial intelligence, machine learning to analyze users' logons and to determine if a password or somebody's account has been hacked. So, for example, if a user logs on in New York City in the United States, and then 5 minutes later somebody logs over, over in China, that looks suspicious. It looks suspicious, but it isn't that it's necessarily just going to instantly block you. It could be that the user is logged on in the United States and they are connecting into a remote machine over in China and logging on. So you could legitimately have somebody logging on that owns the account. But Azure would see that as suspicious, and Azure can do things. It can challenge the user even more by using multi-factor authentication or something like that to verify that you are who you say you are. But it uses machine learning. It looks at the places where the user logs on average. It looks at when they log on average and the things they do while they're logged on. And then it gathers a baseline of security information based on what it's learned by analyzing those patterns over a period of time, and then from there it can determine if there's a chance that a user has been compromised. Another thing you get is this identity governance, and this is really awesome too, because privileged identity management, for example, what that's going to do is it makes it where I can give out temporary roles to people. So in Azure AD we use roles to control the permissions, the rights that you get. But with PIM, Privileged Identity Management, I basically get this ability to say, hey, you temporarily get this access over a period of time. Okay. And then maybe I'm the main admin and I'm going to be on vacation next week. And so I want to temporarily give a user some privileges to do things for a short period of time, for maybe just next week. Okay. And so I can do that and then have it expire, like, let's say on Friday or something of next week when I get back off vacation, whatever. So that's what PIM will do. You can also make it where a user has to ask for the power from a manager for a temporary amount of time, and then it gives it to them for an hour, and if they want to ask for it again, they can. This is really neat technology. You have access reviews. That makes it where periodically users who are members of groups and have role access and things, periodically that has to be reviewed to determine whether or not the user has it. And title management. So this is all about, controlling whether or not somebody should have access to certain information. So as you can see, with this extra, $3 extra a month, you're getting Premium 2, and Premium 2 gives you some really great extra security features. Now, how do you tell what your current Azure AD is at? So you can tell if you go to portal.azure.com and go ahead and sign into that. All right, and if we click the menu button here and go to Azure Active Directory, we can see right here that I am currently at Premium 2. All right. Now, I can also click on Licenses and then click All Products, and I can see. Now, the reason I'm at Premium 2 is because I have this Enterprise Mobility Plus Security E5, and if you click on that and click on Service Plan Details, you'll notice that's where you're getting your Premium 2 from. Of course, if you're EMS, if you don't have EMS or your EMS is expired, you can you can go over here to license features, overview, and then click on get a free trial. And I had activated my EMS license, and that gave me Premium 2. But once that expires, I can also activate this Premium 2 trial and get another period of time where I get to play around with Premium 2 in this little trial tenant. Okay, but that's how you can tell. Again, you go to Azure Active Directory, and you can see right here under tenant information that you're currently at Premium 2. Users also have to be licensed for Premium 2 in order to be support the Premium 2 features. So again, if I go to users and I click on a particular user and look at the user's licenses, this user has no licenses, but if I assign this EMS license, they will have that Premium 2 license. Okay, and so that is how that's going to be the difference between the P1, P2, the Office 365 apps, formerly known as Basic, and then the free version of Azure AD. One of the things that Microsoft has put a big focus on over the years is multi-factor authentication, also known as MFA. And so we're going to take a look at understanding what multi-factor authentication is all about. So what is multi-factor authentication? Well, over the years past, we've always kind of focused on password authentication. And password authentication is just falls into that first category you see there, which is the something you know factor of authentication. There's also something you have and something you are. Something you have being like a smart card, a key fob, a cell phone. Something you are biometric, which gets into fingerprint matching, voice recognition, retinal scanning, iris scanning, all of those fun things. So in the first factor, the something you know, and again, this being the thing that we've focused on for years and years and years, passwords, PIN numbers, even the security questions that you use a lot of times to change your passwords on websites, like, what is your mother's maiden name? What is the name of the street you grew up on, or the name of your first pet you ever had? Those all fall into the category of something you know. And the big vulnerability about those a lot of times is that people will use the same password over and over and over and over again. And it's just human nature because, of course, we want to try to remember it, right? So the other problem is we have the issue of we use the same password over and over and over again, but then also we end up having to change our passwords on different websites and all that. So what users end up doing is they end up storing their passwords somewhere in an easy to find place, such as a text file, okay, on their desktop called passwords, okay, or the worst scenarios, of course, where people write their passwords down on sticky notes and stick them to their monitor, or the infamous hide your password under your keyboard, okay, scenario. So that, of course, none of those things are great solutions for storing passwords. Although there is a good argument, people say that your password is more secure if it's just written down and kept in your wallet. Believe it or not, because most of the hacking that's going on is people hacking you across the internet or the network. So maybe keeping it in your wallet is a safer place. There's a good argument there, actually, but the something the issue with it is simply a person could be anywhere. If they learn your password, maybe because you got phished through, phishing attack or something like that, they're able to discover what your password is and then log on as you from anywhere, including China. All right. And then you have something you have. Something you have would be a smart card or a key fob cell phone, as I said. So what are those things? So smart card has a smart card chip. It has a little bit of memory. You might even have a smart card in your credit card nowadays. A lot of times they're smart cards. Or if you are a DoD person, military, whatever, you might be carrying around this thing called a CAC, a common access card. So that is a smart card. Okay, so a smart card is a common one that's used in a lot of organizations and companies, especially the military or DoD being a huge organization that uses it. And then you have what's known as a key fob. So a lot of times people will call those RSA key fobs. RSA key fobs, what it is a little keychain device you carry around with you, and simply pops a number up every 30 seconds or so, and from there you would log on. You'd have to put that number in. Of course, the cell phone is sort of taking over as the de facto standards for the something you have strategy. In fact, you're going to see that with Microsoft's MFA, multi-factor authentication, they really put a focus on having that cell phone with you, because the cell phone allows you to have text messages sent to it, as well as you can have a phone call. You also can download the Authenticator app, and that's going to allow you to get in. And then finally, the last one, the something you are, that's measured by biometrics. Look at physical characteristics of people. So Microsoft has a technology in Windows 10 called Windows Hello, and if you are in a business environment, you have a business edition of Windows 10. You have Windows Hello for Business, and Hello is their biometric system. And of course, that biometric system can also tie to the cloud. So what's the purpose of all of this? Well, the purpose of all of this is to strengthen the identities with two-step verification. Unfortunately, just one single factor by itself is not secure enough. Hackers have found ways around all of the different factors that you saw on that previous slide. And so just utilizing one of those things is not really enough in today's cybersecurity climate. So with two-step verification, we're going to add a massive layer of security to our environment, because a hacker would not only have to break through one of those factors, they'd have to break through two of those factors. Okay, in other words, with cybersecurity, one of your goals is always, you want a hacker to have to spend all this time to break through one brick wall only to find themselves staring at another brick wall. Two-step verification with multi-factor authentication is going to do that. So if you think about it, if let's say you paired these, and also I want to add this, when we talk about pairing with multiple factor authentication, you want to look at it from the standpoint of two different factors, not two of the same factors. In other words, a password and a PIN number would not be considered truly multi-factor, because they're both something you know. An RSA key fob and your cell phone would not be considered two-factor, because they're both something you have. And then using fingerprint matching and retina scanning would also not be, because that would be two biometric. So you want to pair two different ones. So for example, the DoD is a good example of this. They use those CACs. So you have to have a smart card, a CAC, a common access card, and then you also have a PIN number that's paired with that. So if I was to try to hack a DoD person, Department of Defense, I would have to steal their smart card, but I would also have to know their PIN number. And that's the idea. So Microsoft is trying to implement that in their environments here, make it where somebody has a password perhaps, and then also pair that with their cell phone, and then you would make it really, really difficult in order to break into somebody's account by doing that. All right, how does MFA look for a user? So once we implement MFA, and I'm going to be demonstrating that here shortly, but once you implement MFA, how does it look for a user? Okay, so one of the things you'll notice there is once MFA has been implemented for your user, okay, they're gonna be asked different ways of verifying. One option would be this option here, which involves them putting in their cell phone. They text their cell phone, or the MFA texts their cell phone a code. They put that code in, and then the person logs on. Okay, that is known as HOTP, hash-based one-time password. And then over here, you have another option, which would be to utilize your account to set up whichever of these you want to do. You could have a text message, you could have it call you, and if it calls you, then at that point, the user is going to be asked to enter a number. They enter that number, and it logs the person on. So basically, it's like hit 1 and to log this account on. So the account tries to log on, it calls your phone. This is great because you don't necessarily have to have a smartphone or even a phone that accepts text messages. You could do this off of a landline, and it could call you. You hit 1, it logs the account on. So as soon as the account logs on, they get a phone call, and away they go. Another option is the Authenticator app. So if you have a smartphone on you right now, actually, if you go to your app store, whether it's Android, Apple, whatever, search for the Microsoft Authenticator app, and that's another option for utilizing MFA. All right, so multi-factor authentication, let's start here on portal.azure.com. We'll go to our Azure AD Blade and then go back over here to users, and again, here is multi-factor authentication. This is where we're going to do it. Don't forget, if the resolution of your monitor is kind of low, you may have to click the ellipse symbol. So we'll go back over here to multi-factor authentication and just kind of run down through here. So if I wanted to enable multi-factor authentication, there is bulk abilities to enable it for everybody, but maybe I just want to enable it for, I don't know, Bob Jones. I can go right over here to the right, and I can click to enable this for Bob Jones. So then at that point it says about enabling multi-factor auth. If your users do not regularly sign in through a browser, you can send them this link, and then they can go ahead and register. Because what will happen is the next time this user goes to authenticate, it is going to make them register for multi-factor authentication. So what exactly does that mean when they do that? Well, let's jump back over real quick and look at our users again, okay? So if we click on Bob Jones, for example, we can go right here to authentication methods. And right now, this information has not been registered for Bob Jones, right? Bob Jones, when he logs on, he'll have to put in a phone number, email address, all that. But notice something else. We've got require re-register of MFA. So when he registers with MFA, he'll be able to use that to prove who he is, multi-factor authentication. But we can also require him to re-register, okay, if we want. So we could force him to re-register multi-factor authentication later down the road. Maybe we suspect somehow somebody has tricked him or something, gotten access to his account. We can force a require a re-register if we want, okay? So from there, I can jump back over here to the multi-factor authentication page. I can enable this for Bob Jones. We'll go ahead and say enable multi-factor auth, okay? Just like that, it's now officially turned on for Bob Jones, okay? At that point, if I want, I can enforce this. So notice here it says about non-browser applications. So after multi-factor auth is enforced, users will need to create app passwords to use non-browser applications such as Outlook or Link. For security reasons, app passwords are not available to admins who will be able to sign in only with the browser. Okay, so if we enforce this, the issue you may run into there is what about older applications? They say Outlook and Link, but actually that's not true. It's not just all versions of Outlook and all that. It's legacy applications like Outlook 2010. If you have like Outlook 2013, the app has no problem supporting multi-factor authentication. So you can go out there and search. Microsoft's got some information on some of the apps that are considered legacy or not. The problem is, obviously, if you force multi-factor authentication and a user's using an older app like that, they just won't be able to log on, and that's obviously a bad thing. Some of your legacy applications just don't support multi-factor authentication with Microsoft. So this is going to be a workaround for you, okay? So I can enforce multi-factor authentication right now if I want to, and they're warning me that if I'm going to enforce it, the user is not going to have any choice every time they log on. They're going to be, they're going to have this enforced multi-factor auth enabled, and this is going to throw off the app password scenario, the legacy apps. But we can create what's called app passwords for the user, and I'll show you a little bit more on this. Just stick with me for a second. I'm going to click enforced, okay, and so we've enforced that. For Bob Jones. We've also got manage user settings. Manage user settings says require selected users to provide contact methods again. So I could go ahead and check that if I wanted the user, when they log back on the next time, they're going to have to provide all their contact info again. I've got delete all existing app passwords. Okay, so again, an app password is going to involve when the user logs on, they can create an app password that will basically be able to bypass multi-factor auth for legacy applications like Outlook 2012. Okay, so that's basically what that's going to do for you. If you want to delete those, so the user has to create a new one, it'll let them create a new one upon their next sign in. And then restore multi-factor authentication on all remembered devices. So If I want any device that's previously used multi-factor authentication with this, it'll restore that multi-factor information for all the remember devices, and at that point multi-factor auth will still work with those. Okay, so I can save that if I want. I can come right here now. This is what I really want to show you. Come right here to where it says service settings and click on service settings here. Okay, now at that point you're going to notice it says app passwords. Okay, so you're basically saying allow users to create app passwords to sign into non-browser apps. So that's your legacy applications I was just talking about. They do have a learn more you can click on that, and it's going to provide you with some more information on it. But if you actually go out there and you search in a search engine like Google, MFA app passwords, they have an article that gives you a little bit more information on all this. So I've got configure app passwords for Azure multi-factor. So you can check that article out if you want. But a couple things here. Okay, so number one, they mention just like what I was telling you, the Outlook, the Office 2010 products like Outlook 2010, all that. They tell you that modern applications are fine, right? Office 2013, all that's good. So some of your considerations. So here's a consideration for you. There's a limit. You can have up to 40 app passwords per user. So that is a concern, a consideration when dealing with this. But some of the facts there: applications that cache passwords and use them on-premise scenarios can fail because app passwords isn't known outside the work account. Azure multi-factor authentication is enabled on a user. App passwords can be used with non-browser clients like Outlook and Skype for Business. So a couple things there. And then, of course, your app passwords will have names associated with them. Outlook, Word, whatever app they're using. If it's an older application. Okay. They also mention if you're using ADFS, there's some federation considerations here. App passwords can be supported, but there's some configuration here that would have to be set up. Now, as far as users using it, you're going to enable it right where we are right here. You're going to allow it right here. Okay, and they tell you that. But when your users are logging on, they tell you right here too, user completes their initial setup for Azure multi-factor authentication, that's when they're going to have that option to create a app password. So we could allow that if we want right here, or we could say do not allow it. Of course, keep in mind the legacy applications would not be able to authenticate at that point. Another thing we've got here is we've got skip multi-factor authentication for requests from federated users if we want. We can do trusted IPs, and we can just basically put in IP addresses of where somebody might be authenticating. We've also got methods available for users for verification. We've got text, notification, verification code, call by phone, but you have to have a full tenant, a full-blown tenant to support call by phone. Not a trial tenant. Then remember multi-factor authentication on trusted devices. So trusted devices, once a device is authenticated, it can become a trusted device. And it says allow users to remember multi-factor authentication on devices they trust between 1 and 365 days. So number of days users can trust device, that defaults to 90. Okay. They also warn you here, they say, or not warn you, but they provide a note. For optimal user experience, we recommend using conditional access sign-in frequency to extend the session lifetime on trusted devices. Basically, you can utilize what's known as a conditional access policy to control some of this and extend things out if you need to. So once you've configured what you want there, you can go ahead and click save the settings, and you've officially set up your multi-factor authentication for support for app passwords and for your users. I now want to talk to you about a feature that adds a lot of security to the Microsoft 365 and Azure Cloud services. It's a feature called Conditional Access. Conditional Access is a feature that helps monitor the different things users are doing in your environment, the different applications they're trying to access, different data they're trying to access, but also it looks at where they're coming from in regards to those things. So in other words, for example, maybe I have a iPhone 7 and I want to check my Exchange Online email using the Outlook app. Or maybe I've decided that I want to download a totally different app that's not approved by the company and check my email that way. Maybe I'm going to do it at 3 o'clock in the morning. Maybe I'm going to do it over in China. Or maybe I'm a hacker who's actually broken into somebody's account and I'm trying to get access to their email. Okay, the idea of conditional access is setting a bunch of conditions in place that monitors where, when, and how somebody is accessing information in your environment. Now, all of this is going to boil down to 3 main criteria. One being something called a signal. Okay, a signal is going to try to help make a decision on what to do if signals are detected. Okay, so signals are going to involve, the apps and the things people are doing, and then a decision has to be made, and then based on that decision, some type of enforcement. Okay, let's take a deeper look at the logic of all of this. Now, why is this important? Well, we call this the dilemma of the modern administration. Okay, modern administration is going to involve the concept that users want to be able to use any apps they want at any time of day, anywhere on the planet. And that's scary, right? If you think about it. The problem is our companies a lot of times are enablers. Our companies, they don't care. They're like, hey, we want that to happen. We love the idea that users can that employees can work anytime, anywhere, with any app and access their data. But that causes a lot of problems for us, right? Because it doesn't allow us to easily protect our data. The good news is Microsoft has provided us with tools to assist us in all that. And of course, conditional access is one of the tools that's going to help us. Okay, so we have got to find a way to consider things like our signals, okay, which are the ways they're being detected, things like user location, the devices they're using, the applications they're using, and maybe they're a real-time risk. There's somebody who's trying to break in from a totally different place than a user normally comes in at, and then verify these attempts. Okay, allow the access or perhaps block the access based on what's been discovered by the signals, or require MFA, which is multi-factor authentication, to provide that additional level of checking to see if the person is who they really are. The thing is all the security that we're putting in place, we don't want to hinder everybody, okay? We want things to be secure but not hinder everybody. You always got to remember, though, that whenever you introduce security into an environment, it is going to affect things a little bit. I always use the analogy, it's like the fact that I have to unlock my front door before I can go in my house. Does that slow me down a little bit? Yeah, it slows me down a little bit getting into my house. But am I going to just rip the door off the house and throw it in the trash because I don't want to do that? No, absolutely not. I want that security. So this is a really good security solution. The other problem that we run into is we admins, we can't be everywhere at all times. But if you've got this machine learning, artificial intelligence capabilities, and you can put policies in place, these machine learning signals can really help you in detecting different types of threats that may be trying to get access to your stuff. So the two things here you've got signals, you got the decisions that are going to be made based on those signals. So here's some of the things that will trigger in regards to signals. The signals are going to be based upon certain rules that you put in place. Okay, the rules can be based on user accounts. It can be on groups. It could be based on IP location. I can have approved places like IP address based subnets where somebody can connect in, or maybe I block it. I could put in approved IP ranges on the internet here in the United States and block other countries, or require you to be on the TCP/IP network at our office. I can base it on devices, so maybe a certain device, like I was talking about having an iPhone 7. Maybe there's a huge risk on iPhone 7s right now, so I could block iPhone 7s if I wanted. Cloud app security, that's going to be the cloud-based applications people are using. I could block based on that. Perhaps maybe somebody is using Dropbox, which is not a Microsoft app, but they're using Dropbox to try to share some data in our environment. I can have a rule that blocks them, okay? Certain applications that people are using to access things, I can block that or allow that. And then real-time calculated risk, that gets into looking at things like times a day people are connecting and all of that. Then the decision that's going to be made, as you can see, there's two main decisions. You're going to block it or you're going to grant it. But if you're going to grant it, you can require some additional checking. I can require MFA, multi-factor authentication. I can require that your device be what is called a compliant device, which means it's a certain type of device, model device. It's got to have a certain operating system on it. I could require that you are using a hybrid Azure AD joined computer. That means your computer is joined to a domain as well as to Azure AD, Azure Active Directory. And then lastly, I could make it where you're required to use an approved app. So I was using an example, maybe I'm trying to check my email from my phone using the Outlook app, and that's approved. But then maybe I decide, oh, I'm going to go and download a cheap little app. Maybe I don't like Outlook. Maybe I want an app called Easy Mail that's a little bit more user friendly or something. Well, we could block that because that's not an approved app. It could be a security risk. So again, all in all, conditional access is going to add a lot of security to your environment. Hey, this is John Christopher. I hope you enjoyed getting to experience a little bit of this course, and I hope you'll join me on the full adventure. If you'll check the description of this video, you'll see a link that'll show you how you can get access to the full course. Now, in the full course, you're going to learn how to set up a practice environment where you can practice hands-on, and I'm going to provide you with lots of virtual simulations that you can do 24/7. All you need is a web browser. So I hope you'll join me, and I hope you'll also give me a like and subscribe. I'm trying very, very hard to get this channel to build and grow, and so I hope you'll take the time to do that.